I think that is something that a lot of people have said, and reality is yes, it can happen. Okay, but dare I say that would look really bad for the federal government.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm your host, Adi, and you're listening to Sabah Matters Podcast, brought to you by Daily Express, where we discuss news that made our headlines in the land below the wind and speak not only to policymakers, but also entrepreneurs, experts, industry leaders, and inspiring individuals on reasons on why Sabah matters to the rest of the world. So, many of you are watching with trepidation to know what exactly happened on Monday at the Court of Appeal, Dexter, right?
Yes,
So,
correct.
with that end, we have none other than the man himself, Datuk Roger Chin, a nominated assemblyman of the Sabah Legislative Assembly, who has also been very vocal, former president of the Sabah Law Society, and obviously championing for the Sabah 40%. Maybe we can just start here. What's your reaction on Monday? What's
I think to be honest, it was expected in the sense that the stakes are very high, and I think reality is, unfortunately, a lot of people may not understand the whole thing. Judges included, by the way. Okay, judges maybe don't quite realize that there are solutions to problems. For example, one of the reasons that was given during the stay application for why stay was granted was that it will have great financial ramifications for Sabah. For Malaysia, right? Yes, of course it will have been, but you're talking about 50 odd years worth of accumulation of dues due to Sabah. It'll be very high. However, no one talked about you having to give us container loads of 100 ringgit dollar bills, 100 ringgit bills, and in order to pay up the few 100 billions that it's estimated to be. So when the Court of Appeal gave reasons like it's complex to calculate. Yes, it's complex to calculate because you were not doing the job within the period it's meant to be done. So if you, like anything, do not do it for over 50 years and you want to look for the data, then of course it's going to be missing. It's going to be hard to find. It may not even be available. Okay, so the complexity is due to the failure to observe what the federal constitution said. So one reason the Court of Appeal gave for the grounds was it's very complex. You need more time. Then the second reason, like I said, amongst a few other reasons, is that it will have severe financial ramifications on Malaysia. What more, given the current geopolitical environment with the war in Iran? All of these reasons are, to be honest, very, very, it makes me very, very sad because these reasons are not good reasons. Okay, they are a reason, but they're not good reasons. They're all being made by the failure of the governments to actually make it happen when it should have happened. So by virtue of that, although it was expected in the sense that, well, the stakes are high, so they probably would stay it pending the appeal. But of course, in my heart of hearts, I was hoping that the courts would be brave enough to say, this is something that is due to Sabah for over 50 years. We're not going to delay it anymore, and we're just going to let the course run through. Now, bear in mind, if you're talking about 180 days, it's not short, okay? You're talking about 18 days. Yes, I agree, it's very short, okay? 180 days is long enough for negotiations to happen if you were serious about it. But actually what happened in reality was they have 4 meetings. Okay, 4 meetings spread out over close to 180 days, about 160 odd days, where the first 3 meetings were what they call technical meetings. What are technical meetings? They're literally people with no decision-making powers sitting down and saying, this is what I want. And then the other side saying, this is what I want. And then the other party say, okay, we'll take note of what you want, and we'll bring it up to our management at the top, and then we'll get back to you. So 3 meetings wasted with no decision-making powers. There was only 1 meeting. Now, if you were serious about this, would you only hold 4 meetings in 180 days?
That's like a meeting every 40 days, 40 something days for
There you go.
to be done, right?
Yeah, okay.
So if you were serious about it, you really would be having a meeting, what, dare I say, twice a week, maybe?
Oh, God
right?
forbid.
Stationing people here, or even every week for that matter, right? Stationing people here, stationing people over in Putrajaya, whatever was needed. But if you take 180 days and do 4 meetings, and 3 out of those 4 meetings are meetings that cannot go anywhere, then whose fault is it that you have run out of time?
Okay, okay. Maybe perhaps we should go back to the very beginning, all right? So as a lawyer, how did the 40% actually turn about, all right? And perhaps during that moment itself, what was your reaction? What was your realization when you found out, okay, Sabah is actually due this much, right? Maybe you could take us back to that moment.
Sure. So this actually happened during COVID.
Okay.
Whilst COVID happened, the MCOs happened. There were obviously a lot of people who were very free with their time, and WhatsApp was blowing up with people commenting on everything under the sun. And one thing that really caught my attention was talk about the 40%. Okay, I think at that time everyone was very pessimistic and but hopeful at the same time. So the pessimism showed in the sense that everyone was saying this is the current state of affairs in Sabah. Optimistic in the sense that we can do so much better, and then that's where the 40% came in. Now there were many lawyers who said SLS should be doing something about that. At that time, I was still the president. SLS should be doing something about that. And for the longest time, believe you me, I said, actually, that's not our problem. Okay, that is the government's problem. And if you think about it legally, yes, it is the government's problem. Okay, because the two people who are meant to be negotiating this, we talk about parties in a agreement, right? Is literally the federal government and the state government. Okay, so if these two people are not doing it, who are you as a third party busybody enforcing rights of other people, right? So for the longest time, we said, no, it's not my problem. And I remember messaging somewhere, and I hope no one kept this, somewhere in one of the groups where I said, it's not SLS's problem, it's a government's problem. If they think that something needs to be done, they have to do it. But as we went along and so, a realization came upon me and my exco at that time, where it was this. It was, if we don't do it, who else is going to do it? Because it was very obvious at that time, the government wasn't going to do anything, okay? For reasons which are understandable. And the reason is basically this. You had an offshoot of a Malayan party who was leading the coalition in Sabah. Why would they be suing themselves? It's literally like a son suing a father. So you knew that was unlikely going to happen, right? So then we thought more about it. We realized the best people with any standing to be able to do this is obviously SLS, because in SLS's powers in our advocates ordinance, which is an enactment, a legislation, it does talk about helping in legal matters for the public for without fear or favor. That's in our ordinance, in our legislation. And because of that, there is a body of case law which says that gives Sabah Law Society, Malaysian Bar for that matter, legal standing to take up legal issues like this. So then that's the first realization that if we don't do anything about it, probably we can talk for another 50 years, nothing's going to happen, right? Yeah. So someone needed to step up. So we thought, okay, I asked my exco, can we do this? They said yes. That was the first hurdle we had to overcome. The second hurdle that we had to overcome was who was prepared to take this action up, right? Lawyers, for that matter. So then I approached Jan and Dr. David Fong, and I asked them, I said, would you like to help in this action? And I said the only caveat that I have for this is you guys must hang around from the start until we finish. And no one can opt out at any point in time or say they're too busy. And both of them said yes, they are prepared to commit themselves for the entire duration. And it is because of this commitment, and this is where I must say thank you to Dr. David and Jen. Your commitment really made a difference because of the amount of time you were prepared to put in, the research, and of course, not to mention pro bono, and never ever asking for a single cent from anybody, whether it's government, whether it's public, whether it's assemblyman or whatever, never asking. That, I think, is testament to what this action was all about. Don't forget, there was also the element of danger, right? I think someone once said to me, and it occurred to me much later on, that you're very brave. And I thought, brave, why? And they said brave because you're going up against the government. Of course, you're not really going up against them, but you're taking up an issue which is not clearly in their favor. But you know what? I think due to my naivety at that time, I didn't think about this. All we thought was, if it's not us doing this for Sabah, who else will be doing it? So we did it. And lawyers, for that matter, also similarly put all their eggs into that basket, which is for the good of Sabahans, for Sabahans, and they did it. And that was effectively the origin story of how SLS got involved. So the EXCO approved it. The lawyers agreed to do this and were committed to it. And because of that, we had the elements to start an action. And of course, how to find an avenue, an angle in, that came with the review orders that happened, which basically talked about from 2021 onwards, how much money was given to Sabah. That was the perfect angle to come in. So it was a lot of things that happened. And I honestly do not believe at any point in time it could have happened otherwise. So I believe in God, so I'll say it's God willing, because God will put all of these situations together in order to make something happen. So given another set of circumstances, maybe we wouldn't be here, right? But those were the things that happened to allow us to be here today.
Just to circle back, you mentioned Jane and Dr. David were doing a pro bono, right, on top of practicing themselves, right? So I think so it just says about the devotion and
I think it's very admirable, that people will go out of their way, not expecting anything in return, because this kind of thing could take years and years.
Well, it's already taken us years, right?
Yeah.
Where do we start it? 2022? Around there, right? 2022. Now we are, by the time, it is going to finish pretty soon. Let me explain why. So the hardest hurdle to overcome was the locus part of it, the standing. So that was overcome. Don't forget, they appealed all the way to the federal court, and then we succeeded in that. Then only could we hear the substantive part before the High Court. That's done and dusted. And now we're appealing to the Court of Appeal. The federal government is appealing to the Court of Appeal. That's most likely going to be heard this year, the appeal proper. And hopefully, if we succeed, that will be the end of it. But bear in mind, at any point in time, the federal government was most welcome not to have appealed or to even stop the action. They could have agreed that we had locus. They could have agreed to listen to the substantive part and let the High Court make the decision and abide by the High Court decision. Some people have said, don't you think something so serious, you need the federal court to determine whether or not this is what the actual legal stand is? Yes, that's one way of thinking. But the other way of thinking is, of course, there is a choice by the federal government to be able to say, we are okay with the decision of the High Court because it follows the federal constitution and we respect it and we will abide by it. Why is it now the federal government talks about abiding by the Court of Appeal decision? Why not abide by the High Court decision? Appeal is a right, but it's not mandatory. Okay, nothing ever says you must appeal. You could have stopped at the High Court and say, I respect the High Court's decision and I will pay my 40% entitlement. But they didn't do it. Okay, so I think that's where I think we must really be very clear.
Yeah, I mean, because you mentioned in your article that it removes urgency from the federal government to actually act upon this, right? So now it just means back to negotiating tables, right? And like you said, they show up only once every 40 something days, right? So there's no incentive really for the federal government to actually take up on this, right? Until later in the year, right? That's
So
yeah.
so it's correct, Adi. So basically, what will happen now is because there's no time constraint, they're free to not negotiate or negotiate at their
At the leisure.
which they've already done. Okay, they've already done it at the leisure. So now they can even go for an even more leisurely stroll if they want to. Okay, because there's no compulsion. So the brilliance of that decision made by the High Court was there was a timeline. Remember, 50 years. So what's wrong with putting a timeline there, right? We've already negotiated for 50 years. That was the federal government's argument, by the way, before the High Court, which is where we are having ongoing negotiations, ongoing for 50 years. Okay, so I think that's the reality. Putting in a time frame was needed because you can already see even 180 days is not enough. Who's to say 1 year, 2 years later is even enough, right? At the rate everyone moves, you'll never get there. Maybe we'll get to 100 years before anything will happen.
Okay. So do you think there will be any solution at all?
Okay, so back to what I was saying, the solution will come. So the Court of Appeal is going to hear this year. And then after that, regardless, I know either us or the other side will appeal to the federal court. And when we get to the federal court, it most likely will be heard next year. So the end is in sight. Okay, I think we can go on before the courts. At the max, by next year, we would have a final determination already. Okay, so there is an end in sight. It's not going to drag on forever, and we hope all Sabahans are with us. And at the very least, please say prayers for us that we will get the right decision for the people of Sabah, and that Sabahans will get what it deserves, and the courts will see it that way as well.
So there's already still that legal option, right? But let's talk about other pressures that can be applied to the federal government, right? They already have one at the courts. The political side's still up for negotiation, right? What other avenues can be taken, but maybe even regular people, to tell the federal government, hey, you better rush on this quickly because we want you to negotiate. We want you to come up with a solution on your framework, right? Like Prime Minister last year said that 10 billion was taken out, 17 billion was given in, right? How can we get him to say, hey, how did you calculate all those 10 billion, that's 17 billion, right?
Okay, so I think one thing that needs to happen is with the stay application, and the Chief Minister yesterday has already said that negotiations must continue, right? And I hope the state government is dead serious about that. What that means is, notwithstanding you now no longer have a time period to negotiate in, it doesn't mean negotiations stop. Meaning, if the federal government wants to take a leisurely stroll, the state government will not allow it to happen. Hopefully, the state government will insist, write every day if you have to the federal government and say, let's have a meeting tomorrow, the next day, name as many days as you can, right? And keep writing so that you have continuous negotiations happening. Because let me tell you what that will achieve. Okay, if you have continuous negotiations and you are serious about negotiating an outcome, hopefully, eventually, you will get to the outcome. All right. When you get to an outcome, then you can stop appealing and you can just agree this is what's going to happen. But if you don't talk and you are taking your own sweet time to talk, nothing's going to happen. So that's one thing that can happen, notwithstanding that there is a stay application. The second thing that can happen is civil service, the public must keep talking about this, okay? Never, ever let this be an issue where you think it is, it's old news, it's something that there are other things that are more important. There could be other things more important, but this is extremely important because if we let this rest at any point in time, if we let it drop from the consciousness, national consciousness, state consciousness, what you realize is that the federal government will be very happy to move on to the next thing. Okay. So as the public, as civil society, we must put the pressure on, even the press for that matter, right? Don't let this rest. Keep writing on it. Keep putting it in the national consciousness so that they know they can't drop it. Like any problem, if we have a problem, the best way of not dealing with it is how? To avoid it, isn't it? So if they can avoid it because you guys are not interested anymore, they will. Anyone would, right? So I hope what it means is, number one, the state government will not relent, insist on negotiations happening, notwithstanding the appeal, notwithstanding the stay, with the hope that they can arrive at an agreement within that period of time. The appeal will most likely be heard before the end of the year. But you can still, who's to say, given another 100 days, right, you can't agree. And also, like I said, the press, civil society, politicians, the MPs, the assemblymen, all of them must keep insisting that this is something that Sabah wants, Sabah needs, Sabah demands, so that this will always remain in the forefront, and the federal government cannot let this just slip into oblivion.
But do you think there's a possibility that the federal government may hold off on other payments like health or education? They're spending so much on health and education in Sabah, right? So do you think there will be a situation where, okay, we'll give you the 40%, but we may, now you settle your own for health, for education, since we're giving these funds back to you. Do you think there's any possibility of that happening?
I think that is something that a lot of people have said, and reality is, yes, it can happen. Okay. But dare I say that would look really bad for the federal government, because the 40% is on top of the payments that they're meant to make to the states, the development grants to all the states. So as a federal country, federal system, what's meant to happen is the monies are collected by the federal, some are at the state level, but mostly at the federal level. And with the monies collected, they're meant to channel it down to the states to develop the states, which is what a federal system is meant to be, right? So that one is the federal government's duty, okay? So they're meant to make sure that all the states are developed. On top of that duty is the special grant, the 40%, the 2/5. That's on top of that. Okay. Now you're right in saying that the federal government may say, "Oh, look, since you're going to get 4 or 5 billion, by all accounts, it seems to be by what PM says. I think he said last year." Or the year before, Malaysia's income from revenue from Sabah was 10 billion, right? That's what he said. Of course, I would put a huge question mark on that and say, I don't know how you calculate that, but even assuming, we'll take your word at it, that's 4 billion. Okay, so that's 4 billion. But let me explain very briefly. This is a huge difference between the budget 4 billion and the 4 billion special grant. Okay. The 4 billion budget is a promised amount that's due to you. So if you can spend that money, it's yours. But if you don't spend that money, you don't have it. So it's not money in pocket. That's very important to understand. So this is why there's so much confusion all the time when they say we have spent so much. The reality, have they really spent so much? They may have allocated so much, which is in the budget, 17 billion, I think it was, right? 17 billion, but we will never ever receive that 17 billion. Okay, we will receive a fraction of that 17 billion, whatever we were ready to spend, but the remainder of it is not spent. Okay, but the federal government will say, we gave Sabah 17 billion.
And I think the chief minister said that there's always 25% remaining that we can't even use, right?
Yep.
It just gets transferred over to the next budget.
Correct.
Right?
So there's always, number one, whatever's not left next year. So for example, this year we promise you 17 billion that you can use, but it doesn't mean that you will get the money. Next year round, I announce another 17 billion, but out of that 17 billion next year, I don't know, maybe a good 13 billion came from last year's accounts. And then in 2 years' time, the federal government will tell you we have spent $34 billion in Sabah, okay? Whereas the 2/5, the 40% is different. It is money to us. We can use it any way we want. and we don't have to report to anybody. It is money in the pocket. So that is why it is very, very crucial, number one, to understand that. Okay. And the why it's so important to know the difference between the two things.
Just maybe your wish list, right? For example, we get the 40%, right? It's a substantial amount, right? You as an assemblyman now, right? How would you steer that money into what kind of development you think is most imperative to Sabah?
So this is I mean, we've all listened and we've all heard. You talk about infrastructure, you talk about roads, you talk about energy, you talk about water, all of these things clearly, and of course flood mitigation and all these things. These are very costly, and I am told by reliable people, our sewage system is non-functioning. Okay, it's broken down. It's like don't know how old the thing is. So that these are all problems which you clearly must fix, right? So once you have fixed all of that, then the question is, what else do we build? And this is where politicians matter, because this is a policy issue. So the whoever is in government must decide what is the policy of the state, what are we developing, right? And that will guide the usage of the money. But what is very important is also how that money is used. So this is where the Sovereign Wealth Fund is something that is very much needed. The Sovereign Wealth Fund is something that the Chief Minister has said will be, I think it was in his manifesto, if I'm not wrong, okay? It will be implemented, and from there, it will control how money is used, because it's legislation. It will state clearly what the money can be used for and what it cannot be used for, and that's how you retain control. Some of the most developed countries in the world, like Hong Kong, not Hong Kong, like Singapore, like Norway, even the Middle Eastern countries like Saudi, they have sovereign wealth funds, okay? And the reason for the sovereign wealth funds is to make sure that the money is only used in certain ways. And given our history, unfortunately, of how we may have not used money in the wisest way, I think a sovereign wealth fund is mandatory, is needed.
Okay. But do you think that the whole reason for the delay, it could be that they really have no idea of the amount that they're owed? Does LSLS have any idea on the estimated amount for all the lost years?
No. So the reality is this. These are all official secrets. There's no information available. The only people who have this information is either the federal government, and most of them, the information is held by them, because don't forget, they're collecting. Okay, they're collecting, therefore they know how much was collected. The state may have some idea from what was given back to them. They can extrapolate, and they can work backwards. And a lot of what the state is doing is working backwards to try to arrive at the figure.
Okay, so how did all this happen in the first place? Do you think that, what was the reason for so many years of lapsed payments? And do you think maybe that Sabah's previous leaders, the people were let down for previous leaders not pursuing the matter?
I think, in all honesty, what happened was it fell off the radar. Okay, it fell off the radar. Why? Because during Mahathir's time, we're talking about Malaysianization. Okay, Malaysianization. There was a great centralization of powers. So I think all the politicians at that point in time were caught up in that. I don't believe the 40% was completely forgotten. I'm sure there were people who, behind the scenes, whether it's MOF Sabah or politicians who knew about it, who were probably trying to say something about it. But you had two strong men in, say, Mahathir, PM. And at that time, don't forget, we were a one-party system. Right? We were one coalition system. We never moved beyond that. So when all the powers are concentrated that way, and Malaysianization, centralization of power was the theme of the day, I think it just fell off the radar. That's what happened. And when it fell off the radar, and it's not important anymore. And this is why 50 years later, we are exactly where we are. So I don't think the blame can go entirely to politicians. I think also that the public has to be aware. And this is why it's very important to have education, to have knowledge. Because if you, at the very least, the public are aware, you can insist it happening. But when the politicians, for whatever reason, drop the ball, the public knows no better, then of course the whole thing can go to sleep. So can I just circle back to the 2/5, the talking about too much money, right? So what we were saying is what Dexter, what you were saying was, can they lower that amount to Sabah? They can, but they shouldn't, because like I said, it's their obligation to develop all the states. So they should be giving us the 40% cash in hand to spend exactly how we want it to be spent, because there may be different agendas or policies for that matter. You may have the federal government wanting to develop one specific area, but the state may want to develop another area. Now, with the 40%, we can't do that. Okay, whatever area the government of the day decides is the policy, they can use the 40% to develop that. Right. That is why, yes, possibly it is something that the federal government can do. Say, look, your 2/5 is, say, let's just pick a figure, 4 billion, right? So we are going to, since you already got your 4 billion, we're going to give you less. They could do that, but that would be really doing a disfavor to Sabah, and I would say it's a failure of the federal system, because what that would mean is that they're not doing what they're meant to do, which is develop all the states using the monies collected from taxes, revenue, and you cannot treat the special grant, the 2/5 of 40%, as part of that. That has to be completely separate, because that is what the forefathers bargained for. And remember, I've said this before and I'll say it again. To say now that the amount is very high, it will affect Malaysia, that is only because we have allowed 50 years of accumulation to happen. Okay. Now, again, like I said, no one talks about container loads of ringgit dollar, $100 bills. You can pay by ways of installments, setting off, many different ways of skinning a cat, right? Many different ways of settling this amount. But the biggest thing is, remember this, two issues. The first issue is they have already collected the 40%. Okay, this is money that they already collected, but because they accumulated it over a period of time, it is now a big figure. But it's money that they had and used and enjoyed. Okay, so I think it's very different if you say all of a sudden we are landing a bill of extra 40%, 50 years, and say, here, pay me. Okay, that will say, oh gosh, that's a lot. Where do I find the money, right? But reality is, you took the money, including the 40%, and now you use the money to develop things. And now you're coming back to me and say, that's a lot of money, right? That doesn't make sense, because you took the money already. You've used the money. It's not like you didn't take the money and now you have to find money from elsewhere. All right. So whatever conundrum we're in is really because of the failure to honor the 40% over 50 years, we are where we are. But again, like I said, there are many ways of skinning the cat. You can actually pay in many ways, installments, setting off, whatever. You can even say, okay, I'll assign properties to Sabah, federal properties to Sabah, and we can all account for this. Like any normal accountant will be able to do this for you. And then we just set off, and who knows, maybe the cash part of it can be very little.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's also a failure of imagination on the federal government's part. I mean, you mentioned we can take federal assets, right? Okay, then I guess the joke where we can take half of the Twin Towers rings true,
well,
right?
No, that's a little bit hard to go with that. Yeah. I'll just give you some better idea. How about
those land as well?
Felder land. How about there's a lot of felder land, right? If all of you ever check how much land Felder actually owns, you'd be shocked. Okay. A lot of Sabah land belongs to Felder, huge plantations. Some countries in Europe don't even make up half of the size of that land, right? And yes, correct. But how about gas and oil fields out there, okay, which are Petronas, for example, we could easily say, okay, let's calculate how much this oil field is meant to generate and how much we think the money we can generate from this is. You can calculate this, right? And then we say, okay, so we think this thing is worth, let's just pick a figure, 5 billion over a period of 5 years. We give it to you, we write off 5 billion from the total amount owing to you, accumulated lost years, right? Can be done, easily done, right? And so that's why, like I said, no one says when you have to pay that money, it's not container loads. It's probably talk about boatload of ringgit dollar bills, right?
Yeah, but I think following on that, because you mentioned during Mahathir's time, right? This whole legacy of central instinct, right? The instinct is central authority. And then you have the Prime Minister saying that we've given so much to Sabah. Then you have people like Tunku Razali saying that, anything autonomy, careful because that's on independence, right?
Yeah.
You have Zaid Ibrahim saying that, we're asking for too much, we're forming a Borneo bloc, right? And even that, it trickles down to maybe people in Malaya saying that, Sabah's asking for quite a lot here. It's a failure to understand, like you said, the federal system that we're in, that, hey, we're given this much, we should be given some back, right?
Not only federal system. I think it's also failure to understand history and the federal constitution. Okay, because if you understood history, the formation of Malaysia, again, when you look at the history books, what do they teach you in the history books? 31st of August, National Day, right? That's pretty much about it. And then the rest of it, you're learning about the Majapahit, the Srivijaya kingdoms. I'm not sure how that really applies to Sabah and Sarawak, okay? And there's very little about the formation of Malaysia, how Malaysia was formed. So that ignorance is arising from that. They don't understand how Malaysia was formed and what the promises, if they spent a little bit more time in talking about MA63, Cobalt Commission, IGC, Intergovernmental Committee report, right? If they spent a little bit more time, meaning the negotiations that happened when Sabah joined, and Sarawak as well, Malaysia, when they form Malaysia, then you will start to understand. Then no one is going to say, you're asking for a lot, right? That was the bargain. That was the bargain to form Malaysia. Don't forget, Malaysia didn't exist. There was no Malaysia. There was a Malaya, okay? There was only a Malaya, and they became part of Malaysia. They formed Malaysia together with Sabah and Sarawak. But without Sabah and Sarawak, without Singapore, there would be no Malaysia. So are we asking for too much? No, we're asking exactly what we bargained for when we form Malaysia. Nothing more, nothing less, right? And so because of that, when you have people talking about, autonomy, well, I'll ask this one question. In many parts of the world, Canada, Quebec, right? China, there's many autonomous regions, Xinjiang, many others. Okay,
States went to war over this,
right? They're autonomous. Does that make them less Canadian? Does that make them less Chinese? I will say China now obviously is one of the top nations in the world. And do they say, we have problems with all of these autonomous regions and therefore we are somehow a weaker country? No. What China has managed to do is recognize the differences that they have and allow them to operate themselves in the greater good for harmony, right? So ours is even better. It's in the federal constitution. So we're not actually asking for any more autonomy than what we bargained for. This is the autonomy that we agreed upon. But even if you give autonomy, why does it mean that we are talking about independence? We're talking about somehow succeeding from Malaysia. These are all political scaremongering, okay? They will always use political scaremongering. Amongst them is Petronas is going to go bust if Sabah gets the money, right? Malaysia will go bust if we give Malaysia the 40%. Don't talk about autonomy because it equals secession, right? Then you have Zaid Ibrahim talking about the Borneo bloc, how we're using it as what was it? Something ridiculous.
Way to take over the federation.
Yes, right. Hello. There are 31 plus 25. I'm not sure how we take over the whole of Malaysia with this. MP seats, parliament seats. So clearly we are not big enough in numbers, but what it means is obviously speaking in one voice, right? And what is wrong with that, given history, given how East Malaysia has been sidelined, right? To have one voice is much better than having many different voices. And at the very least, we can, I wouldn't say we're equal, but at the very least, we can stand up with a louder voice and when things are not done the right way. Because as has been proven in the past, due to our non-speaking with the same voice, things have unfortunately been passed in Parliament, which are not in Sabah's favor, not in Sarawak's favor. And that's why we need to be able to stand up as one block. So it would be mano a mano, man to man, at the very least.
So what else do you think we should do? Because since none of this is being taught in school syllabus, right? So do you think there's a lack of education for the young public? Because I think many young Sabahans and Sarawakians today are not even aware about reforming Malaysia. You know, the whole gist of it. Why did we form? To be equal partners. You know, what do you think we are missing here?
So clearly the syllabus in the schools, right? What we need to do is be able to go to not only Sabah schools. Of course, it's important to teach Sabahans this, but what we need to do is to have a national syllabus change in the history textbooks that are being taught. Okay, and I really think that is fundamental. Any government worth its salt will allow it to happen. Okay, because what is wrong in teaching what the real history is, so that everyone understands. So no one will be saying any particular group of people are being greedy or asking for things which are not reasonable, unreasonable things, right? So I think it's, of course, like I say, it's important to teach Sabahans this so that they can continuously talk about it. So when non-Sabahans ask them, why are you being so greedy? You can explain to them, this is why. Actually, we're not being greedy. This was what was promised to us,
Correct.
right? And if it's in the national syllabus, the federal, the people, the non-Sabahans, including West Malaysians and Sarawakians, will understand. Oh, okay. But we know that is that was what we promised you, and we are okay with that. You don't have to be happy with it, but you're okay with it, and that can only come from education. So I think what is really, really important is the federal government make this into something that is in the national textbooks in history or in anything else. I mean, you already have things like the Rukun Negara, which talks about the supremacy of the Constitution, right? So if that's the thing, what's wrong with making that part of your history textbooks and saying how Malaysia was formed and what went on during the formation of Malaysia and what was the discussions, what were the fears? You need to understand history in order to understand where we are today.
Okay. Since we're on the topic of solutions here, right? Let's talk about more granular solutions, because Datuk Euro nominated assemblyman. You can bring anything to the assembly should you feel it necessary. So we already have it on the legal side. You already talked about mobilizing the public side. But what about on the legislative, the Sabah Dun, right? What kind of actions or proposals that can be made at the legislative level to signal to the federal government? Because Sarawak, they do it with Petros, right? And do it all the time. Yeah. What about us?
So I think what's really important and something that has not happened, and I hope it will happen, is a lot of the powers that we want, a lot of the things that we want done is actually federal powers, unfortunately. Okay. You want to collect that source, for example, taxes be paid to Sabah first before you give to federal government. You can want that, but it's federal constitution, so it has to go to parliament. Okay. You may want to amend certain tax laws. Again, taxes are all federal. So a lot of the big things that we're talking, the big ticket items are federal powers. So because they're federal powers, what it means is that we in the state legislative assembly can say what we want, but it will not affect how the federal the parliament works. Now remember, we only have 25 MPs. Okay, 222 MPs minus 25 MPs is everyone else. That's why Borneo Block is important, because then it will be 25 plus 31 Okay, that's more than 25. So if you only have Sabah MPs talking, that is what's going to happen. Okay, 222 minus your 25. But what can happen, and this is what I'm hopefully pushing for, is motions can be passed by the State Legislative Assembly on a point. Okay, because that is serious. If a state legislative assembly passes a motion, that is basically the voice of the state. All the elected 70, how many?
73.
Yeah, 73. The elected 73 assemblymen elected by the people have now passed a motion in the state legislative assembly asking for certain things. Then it makes it harder for the federal government to ignore, because then they will know these are the wishes of the people of Sabah. So I'm tabling a private member's bill in the next Dune sitting, which is to talk about enforcing the 40% with one voice, right? It's available on my Facebook. So please do have a look at that. It is essentially to try to get a motion passed by, hopefully unanimously, by Dune. And if you do pass it unanimously, it sends a powerful message to the federal government. These are the wishes of the people, one. And number two, it arms your MPs with a voice to be able to then raise all of these in debates and say that this is what the Sabah people want. And it will give them that confidence and strength to be able to voice up what they need to voice. Because if they are only talking on behalf of themselves, clearly it's not going to get very far.
Okay. I think this will be our last question before we have a break.
Sure.
Okay. So what are your worst fears about the 40% issue? What is the worst that could happen? And also, what if the federal government says, okay, here is the offer, take it or leave it? You know, what is your stance on this?
Well, the worst fear is you lose a 40% case. Although I mean, to be honest, I can't see how, but stranger things have happened. You lose it, and that means you're not entitled to it. Okay, and if that happens, then of course that disappears. But I hope everything that the federal government has said, which is they're not disputing the 40%. They are not so that seems to imply that they're not disputing the 40% moving forward. The 40% lost years is a big issue, but moving forward, that's not an issue. So if sticking to what they have said, and every Sabahan must insist that the federal government sticks to that, right? So meaning, and it will be a point when it's raised in federal court that, or court of appeal, the appellate court said this is what they said. They're not appealing on this, right? So it's not an issue. But of course, like I said, losing that case, then that 2/5, the lost years, which by all accounts is a huge amount of figure, you lose that. So with that loss, you have lost a huge chunk of money to be able to develop at will. Okay, we're easily 20 to 30 years behind West Malaysia. Right, we wish we had LRT, MRTs, BRTs, whatever T's that they have over there. Right, we can't even put a bus system together. I was just driving over here just now, looking at my bus. Right,
Yeah.
you know how many people were on there?
Last one I checked, there was no one in it.
None. Right, I think the only person on there was a bus driver. Okay, and you think to yourself, okay, how long is this thing going to last for? Right? Unless the federal government is just prepared to pump money in forever, which I hope they do, that bus will just close shop pretty quickly. Okay?
Why do you think so? Why do you think there's no one riding the bus?
Yeah, roads are not that fantastic, right? I think okay. In any parts of the world with these sort of things, what you have is you need obviously facilities. Facilities meaning, of course, a proper functioning transport system. One, public transport system, and number two, you need facilities at the feeder parts of it. Okay. So they talk about assuming you have say an LRT, okay, you have an LRT. What you would do is you would have feeders at whichever nodes you want to do. Everyone's meant to go there, park their cars there, and then take the MRT, LRT into the CBD. That's how it's meant to work, right? But of course, the immediate problem is this. Number one, petrol is too cheap. I think the government's not doing anyone favors by making petrol cheap, by subsidizing it, because it makes it so easily affordable for every Tom, Dick, and Harry and Jane to be able to drive a car. Number one, cars are bloody cheap, right? In the sense that anyone who's working can probably afford the cheapest car, which is like what, 50,000 ringgit, right? Or maybe even cheaper, right? And petrol is very cheap. But if both of these things were made more expensive, cars became more expensive, and also petrol was no longer as cheap as it is now, you find that, simply put, they can't afford it. Because they can't afford it, they will start using the MRT, okay? LRT, whatever it is. And like I said, that whole infrastructure needs to be done. You need those nodes at the end, big car parks, which are easily accessible to everybody and usable by everyone. So for that to happen. So I think, in short, the answer to why there are so many cars out there and why the public transport system is not working is because petrol is too cheap relatively compared to other parts of the world, right? And because of that, it makes everyone owning a car too easy, I think, right? Let's be honest, every house that you drive past, how many cars do you see inside there?
Average household 2 or 3 at least.
Correct, right? There you go, right? So if you go to parts in places like Japan or Hong Kong or Singapore, you go through many houses where there's 0 cars. Okay, so if you make cars affordable, way too affordable, this is what happens.
Okay.
I think that gives us a good way to take a break first. Then, okay, we did the 40% part. There's going to be something else also related to the Roger, so stay tuned for that.
Okay. All right.
Right, we're back again with YB Datuk Roger Chin. We went through quite a sad, I wouldn't say it was sad, but it was a lot of grim, serious conversations happening around this 40%. But he said, the end is on the horizon. Who knows? This year, maybe next year. But YB Roger Chin is not only just a lawyer that specializes in the 40%. Many of you don't know, he's also the recently appointed chairman for Sabah Invest.
Correct.
So quite a lot of exciting stuff there, right, Dato'? I mean, what is your impression when you were asked to take on this role?
I think it was a huge honor and a huge challenge as well, because unfortunately at that time there was quite a lot of not so good news about Invest Sabah, and I think that was the first thing that needed to be done, which was to make it better, and hopefully by now we've managed to stop a lot of the things, the bad news that was happening, and hopefully we are moving on to a new horizon. And on top of that, I think we those of you who know, CM appointed Dasri Andrew Sheng to be his economic advisor, but his also main role is to assist ISB to Invest Sabah with investments. So I think one of the things that is not Sabah has not been very good at, or I should say can be better, is how to attract investment. Now, not only foreign investment, that's important, but also domestic investment, okay, investment of all sorts. And there are many products in Sabah. I think the best way of explaining it is this. Someone told me that we all know Sarawak receives a lot of investments. Sarawak receives a lot of investments for many reasons, but it also means that because they are good at it, it's now no longer very cheap to come into Sarawak anymore, meaning you cannot enter at the ground floor. Okay, you can only enter at higher levels, whatever level that is. Whereas in Sabah, because we're starting from a lower level, you can enter, invest in Sabah on the ground floor, and you can build up with Sabah as it goes along. So all of these opportunities are there and available. And what Invest Sabah is trying to do now is to try to make sure all these information are available to potential investors, whether they be domestic investors, whether they be foreign investors. But for example, products. What are the Sabah investment products that are available? It has never been comprehensively cataloged. So the hope is we can do that. We can comprehensively catalog all the available and keep adding on to it as we go along, available investment products with information. I think data is very important. In the past, we may know we want we want an amusement park, for example. That could be a wish list, right? That is an investment, but you need to have much more information than that. You need to know what lands are available for this. So if someone says, "Okay, I'm interested in investing in the amusement park," where are they? Right? You have to be able to say you have 3 options in land A, land B, land C, or however many options, and what the differences between the lands are. Okay, you need all of this information data. So the hope is to be able to catalog all the investment products. Sabah's got a lot of potential. Okay, you've seen the blue economy is certainly one, but ESG projects are also another huge area. There are billions and billions of dollars that are out there ready to invest in projects which are ESG compliant. And Sabah, by virtue of it, in the whole of the world, okay, there are 3 regions with very high ESG investment potential. One is South America, and 2, I think, 2 or 3, and the other one is Borneo. Collectively, 30% of the entire world's ESG potential, investment potential. So what that means is that the 15%, if we do the right things, we can attract a lot of money coming in. So that's one. So ESG, blue economy. You can also talk about blue carbon, land carbon, all of these ESG compliant. Then you can also talk about mines. You can do sustainable mining, okay? It doesn't have to be a bad mining. It can be done properly. That can also be ESG compliant. So that's available. And of course, in the next few years, with the plans for energy and water, we will have a lot more water, a lot more energy in the next 3 years, actually, okay, where potential investors can come in and do whatever they want in the interest of Sabah, of course, to Sabah's benefit, I should say. So there are a lot of very exciting and possible things that can happen. And more importantly, with the right people inside, like Datuk Andrew saying, he can open doors. Okay, he can open doors which are not, you can't even find the door. Don't talk about opening the door. You can't find the door, okay? Datuk Andrew Shane can help you find the door and help you open the door so that you can at least enter and pitch whatever you have to pitch. So there are very interesting things moving forward. ISB is only 5 years old, and in that time, I think in the next few years we should be able to hopefully make it rise to greater heights.
Okay, so what are your top priorities at the moment? Of course, Sabah has a lot of good products, right? So is there any priorities at hand? Is there a certain goal you want to reach within a few years?
So I think that the first important thing is to actually work out what those priorities are. Okay, I think that this is something that we've also tasked ISB to do, which is to find out what are we focusing on. Okay, in the past there was a lack of focus. Okay, it was a little bit all over the place. So it is now to sit back and say, okay, what areas are we focusing on? Manufacturing? Is it mining? Is it blue economy, for example? We need to focus on human capital, tourism, right? They can be all of them, but it's a little bit hard to do too many because then you're not good at anything. So what we need to do is focus on the priority areas, and ISB now has been tasked to work out what those priority areas are, and from that we will focus on those. Of course, what it means is that we will still facilitate everything. Okay, don't just because you fall outside of the focus areas, it doesn't mean that, oh, sorry, we're not looking at you anymore. No, what it means is that, oh, we'll still facilitate you, but those are not the main ones we are going to directly target and facilitate.
When it comes to, like you said, finding the door, opening to Sabah for investment, right? I mean, it's not just finding the right people, right? It's setting up the regulations, it's setting up the environment ecosystem. for a healthy investment destination, right? So, for example, what specific fiscal incentives or tax exemptions, right, can Invest Sabah facilitate to?
So unfortunately, a lot of the tax incentives are federal. Just
Oh,
think
back
that
to federal
okay,
again.
yeah, so a lot of it is MITI driven. Okay, MITI driven. They'll give you your pioneer status and so on and so forth. However, there is something that I've spoken about, and I hope this is something that the state government will take seriously. Is the Sabah state incentives. Okay. For example, land is clearly one. Okay, we can control the amount of quit rent assessment that we charge. That's one. Okay, we can also control how much we charge for water. We can control our port charges. Okay, so these are so from land, the rental from land or the selling price or the whatever arrangement they come up with the land. So these are what I think can be state incentives. Okay, so we can say to, for example, a big company who wants to export a lot of their products, right? We can say, okay, on top of your pioneer status, we can also give you very good port rates. Okay, so your export rates start to go down, charges start to go down, and for example, a very high part of their cost is also paying for the water, industrial water and industrial electricity and all that, right? So if you can lower that, then that's what I call state incentives. So what I think the state can do is look into areas where they have control over and try to see whether or not they can give lower or better deals in those things. Okay. Another thing they can do is incentive can come by the way of some sort of a subsidy. Okay. So for example, they say, okay, I like your investment. I'm prepared to subsidize whatever. Okay. So meaning the state pays for that. So the GLC still gets the full amount, but the state subsidized part of it. So that can also be a state incentive. So I think rather than focusing so much on the federal, because that's also going to be there, we need to also focus on the available things that we can do and come up with a comprehensive list of state incentives that we can give to potential investors, whether they be domestic or foreign.
Okay, so is there anything that can make Sabah stand out? Because there's so many good regions in Southeast Asia that can potentially attract foreign investors. Is there some sort of way that Sabah can say, all right, come here, this is the place for you? Is there any sort of way that Sabah can stand out from the rest of Southeast Asia?
Hopefully. I mean, the obvious thing that Sabah sells is location. Okay, and I think you cannot overestimate the how much that means. Okay, because you are literally in the middle of Asia Pacific. Not many countries can say that, and you have a direct route to China, direct route to North Asia. Going going west, you hit Indochina, right? And going east, you're going to get to Philippines, right? So the location, in terms of being the hub of everything, is clearly there, right? But I think the other thing is to make it the darling of the whole region. Like I said, we need to get our incentives right, okay? And the incentives, like I said, state incentives, for example, we need to make sure that is something that we are serious and able to offer to people. And more importantly, we need to know how to market ourselves. I think this has been one of the weaknesses of Sabah. We don't know how to market ourselves well. So this is where the challenge is for ISB. Hopefully, ISB can get its act together and be able to be the darling of investors. Okay. And all it needs is for us to put up a good show. Again, like I said, knowing what the full products are with information, knowing what our core investment areas are, and also coupled with your state incentives on top of the federal incentives. All of these things, and of course, we must get our energy and water infrastructure correct. But once we get all of these done, I think it will take care of itself. Okay, I think Sabah will become the darling, and of course, making yourself look very attractive. All of these things will help in a huge way in making Sabah attractive.
Some of the more protectionist inclined individuals out there, right? they like to see investment as a potential for security threat, right? Sometimes when you see a particular hegemon pumps in money to invest in a particular region, a lot of people start to raise alarm bells right there, right? Considering the Sabah's position is very strategic, right? It's assumed that many countries would also be drawn in, right? So you have China, you have the United States of America also trying to further their interests wherever they can, right? So what would you say to detractors saying that, oh, we cannot take investments from China because we don't want to extend China's influence and projection? Same for people saying, oh, we cannot take American investment either because that's going to project American influence in the region, right? What would you say to that?
Okay. So I've had similar conversations with other people, and I think the reality is this. I hate using this term, but I think to a certain degree it's true. Beggars can't be choosers. Okay. There will be a point in time when we are no longer beggars and we can choose what we want. Okay. For example, Singapore is probably a country where they can name the type of investments they want. Okay. But we're not there, clearly. I hope we get there. But at the moment, you have what is very important for the state is whatever investment comes in, the deal is sufficiently good for Sabah. Okay, whether it means there's a lot of downstreaming, so there are a lot of jobs available, and how much money in terms of revenue can we derive from this particular investment. So those are the things that we must be very careful and focus on in order to make sure that it is a good deal for Sabah. So it's not so much whether or not the investment doesn't have to come from a particular country. I don't think we need to block any country. It's whether or not it is to Sabah's benefit. Okay, and there should be a minimum amount of benefit that Sabah derives from it, and failing which we don't want to look at it. I mean, for example, if you're exporting your nuclear waste to Sabah, right? We can take it and we can receive billions of dollars, but it's not in Sabah's benefit, right? But if you do technology transfer, you're prepared to put up airplane manufacturing facility in Sabah, and you're prepared to teach Sabahans how to make the airplanes, and you're going to employ hundreds of Sabahans to build the airplane. All of these things, right? Yes, then the answer is yes. Does it matter whether it comes from China? I don't think it does, right? So it's more how much Sabah benefits out of this investment rather than which country it comes from.
Okay. I think currently there's the conflict going on in the Middle East, all right? And a lot of foreign investors are actually looking to Malaysia. So do you think Invest Sabah can play a role in this global pivot? Do you think there's
Definitely.
any opportunity there?
Yeah. Again, like I said, we're getting our house in order means we have, like I said, the right incentives, state incentives, the right products with information, and after that, yes, for sure. There's a lot of money leaving China, and I believe the Middle East as well. They're looking for safe places to open up their thing, right? But if we don't get our infrastructure right, water and energy, then we can't get there. But if we going at the rate we're going, we will get there. So I think what Sabah needs to do is start actively be seeking investors with a plan for 2-3 years in the future. It will take them that long. Any plant, which is a pretty sophisticated plant, will take you 2 or 3 years to build. Okay, it's not going to pop up magically in half a month and then you're operating from there. Planning 2 to 3 years is going to. So this is the right time. So if we get ISB's house in order, we will attract those monies that are out there coming in, and we can make Sabah into an extremely attractive place.
I know you're still quite relatively new in entering ISB here, right? But how would you see prospects regionally as well? Because investment into this region, Sabah's not a vacuum, Sabah's not alone as well, right? We're already importing energy from Sarawak. Sarawak's planning to export it to Singapore. The southern Philippines is coming up as a very, in a way, autonomous, self-sustaining economy. Indonesia is moving to Kalimantan. What can you say about Sabah's role in developing not just Sabah, but the region as well, so that, you know, these areas are quite peripheral compared to central governments, right? Southern Philippines, oftentimes neglected by Manila. Kalimantan finally being focused on. What can we say about developing this region?
I think there's a huge potential for Sabah in that area, because in this region, besides Brunei Actually, we're probably more developed than Brunei, to be honest, right?
That's not really a high bar.
Yeah.
Brunei is nothing there.
In terms of a lot of things, I think we're more developed than Brunei. Brunei is unfortunately not big enough to play that significant a role. But in the whole region, whether it be Mindanao, Zamboanga, and all those, right? Kalimantan, possibly Kuching, right? We would be more developed than other places in the region. And by virtue of that, we should try to be the place where people set up in order to access the whole area. So POIC, for example, tries to be the transshipment hub for the whole area, right? So that's a very good example. Another example that we can do is, given our laws, we're common law. Most of the Western countries understand common law, and therefore it's something that is stable to them, right? And because it's stable to them, they understand it. They find comfort in that. Okay. The other thing that can be done is, for example, we have the only real functioning offshore financial system, which is in Labuan. Okay. Oh, yes, it's a federal thing, but it's physically tied to Sabah, right? So why don't we make it take advantage of that? Why can't we say, okay, Nusantara is coming out, and by all accounts, it will eventuate. It may take a little bit longer than what they thought, but it will eventuate. When that happens, why can't we say, okay, let Sabah be the hub of everything, right? Anyone who wants to set up in Borneo or the Bimpiaga region, which is what you're talking about, the Bimpiaga region, set up your headquarters in Sabah, okay? I mean, in terms of being able to go to Nusantara, Sabah is obviously a logical choice. It's only how many hours to Nusantara from Davao? It's like 4 or 5 hours, right? You can from Sabah you can go down to Kuching. From Kuching to Nusantara, it's going to be a long distance, right? So if you talk about from a logistics point of view, setting up your manufacturing plant in Sabah makes a lot more sense than setting up your manufacturing hub for Borneo in Kuching. Okay, so by virtue of having an offshore system, by virtue of you having laws that are understandable, and something which any proper company will want, and also in terms of potential and location, Sabah is very clearly the region that has to be done. So I have absolute faith that if we get our infrastructure right, and it now all looks like it's going in the right direction, we will sort ourselves. Let's be the Hong Kong for China. Okay, so let Sabah be the entry point for the whole of Bimpiaga, including the future Borneo, which is Nusantara there.
Okay. Do you have any examples of like how we're going to make use of the blue economy or perhaps renewable energy, right? How could Sabah leverage this for foreign investors?
So, blue economy is anything that has to do with the sea and the coast regions. Okay, so for example, when we talk about ESG investments, so you have people who are prepared to put in money for you to replant your mangroves. Either not to cut your mangroves or to replant your mangroves, right? That's one. So Sabah's got quite a lot of mangroves. And then the other thing you can do for blue economy is obviously fishing, right? Because we're in the coral triangle where there's lots of fishes, right? So sustainable fishing. Countries like Japan and Seoul actually are prepared to buy a lot of the fishing products that come out from the area. You have geothermal. Okay, which Sabah has potential, and you also have a wind. So if these wind things are in the middle of the ocean, that becomes blue economy already. Okay, you have seaweed. That's a huge. If we can sustainably and plant and grow seaweed in sizable quantities, that can be made a huge economy. Okay, so all of these things are huge potentials which are there, but in the past, it's not something that has been invested in, and only now we're starting to understand the potentials that it has. And that's why it's very important to be able to again, back to identifying the products. If you can identify the products, what is it? For example, geothermal, for example, your mangroves, and we're in the process of doing that. SMJ Secretariat is in the process of doing that. They're very much the lead agency when it comes to blue economy. And of course, like I said, your geothermal with ECOS and everything, that's all starting to happen. So once we know and identify all the projects, we are then ready to be able to get investors to come in.
Picking up on the blue economy, I believe Sabah is also trying to chase the territorial sea act so that we can get more agency over there. I know we talked about federal and all that, but I cannot resist coming back to this because blue economy, a lot of the sea is under federal jurisdiction, right?
Yes.
But I mean, when it comes to that kind of battle, right, is it beneficial for Sabah to actually take up the battle for jurisdiction over our water resources?
I think
resources.
Yeah, I think there are always two sides to the story. Okay, there are always two sides to the story. So I think my own personal view is there's no harm in taking up the battle because you've already lost it if you don't. Okay, it as of now, they're all your waters only go up to 3 nautical miles, right? Versus your 12 nautical miles. So what that means is that as is already, we have no access to where all the Petronas and all the other foreign companies are in, right? So if you challenge those sort of things, you can only win, you can't lose because you've already lost. If you don't challenge it, this is where we are. Okay, 3 nautical miles, and everything within that is within our control. Anything beyond that, which unfortunately is where the major gas and oil fields are, you've lost already. So for me, I think it's definitely very arguable, and I think we should maybe challenge that as well. Sarawak's already doing it, right? So maybe we should be joining that. So to hopefully get a solution which is in our favor, a decision which is in our favor. Because if we don't, like I said, you're still stuck with your 3 nautical miles, which is the status quo. So what else can you lose? At the worst, you don't get the 12 nautical miles, but it's already the current position, so you don't lose anything. So you can only stand to gain. Therefore, why not join and try to succeed in that court action? So yes, definitely, because with that, blue economy is a huge blue economy will be 12 nautical miles, right? Which means fishing waters, which means oil fields, gas fields, which will be huge benefit to Sabah and Sarawak.
Okay. I think as much as we love speaking to Datuk Roger, I think unfortunately we're out of time.
Oh, really?
So
We can have you next time. Yeah, happy to. We can spill tea on the federal government if we like. Anything you want to say?
okay.
I think that concludes this first episode of this series with Daily Express
Honored,
podcast.
Really honored.
First ever guest on the show.
Thank you.
But yeah, if you like this, please let us know. We can have Datuk Roger again to talk about what's going on. Maybe end of the year, if there's a court case happens, we'll see what happens, the update from
Hopefully
there.
we'll win.
Hopefully we'll win, yeah. Sabahans, I don't know about the side and federal, what they'll think. But thank you so much for listening. And next time we'll have more guests to talk to, more experts from Sabah. Because I think, like I said, with this show, we want to talk not just about politics, about law, but we want to bring the best of the best from Sabah. We want to talk to smart people, experts in Sabah, to talk about what is great about Sabah, right? Oftentimes, we don't really hear often about what's so great about Sabah, right? But now, we finally have a platform to do so. So, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.